Can you actually solo Final Fantasy XIV? No, absolutely not. Rather than beat around the bush and act like it is possible, I will lead with the statement that you can't. Now, the more interesting question is why not, and also perhaps how much can you solo? To answer these questions, here are the rules I will assume counts as soloing Final Fantasy XIV. 1. No other players are allowed, no marketboard, no trading, and no partying with other players at all for any reason. 2. It is only allowed to enter dungeons and trials with either unrestricted party or duty support. Technically, the NPCs aren't other players, and the whole play alone advertisement stems from this fact. Unrestricted party is allowed, however, remember that overwhelming content with levels only do so much when you can't buy high item level gear to match, and getting those levels will also take an eternity. Now, this introduces 3 key points where soloing Final Fantasy XIV stops being feasible according to the rules. When is the first mandatory dungeon or trial where duty support is unavailable, forcing us to go alone? Which of those mandatory dungeons or trials will be impossible to solo? And finally, when is the first dungeon or trial that duty support is unavailable for, but unrestricted party is also unavailable? Let's start with the first point. Duty support covers all dungeons and trials in the A Realm Reborn leveling experience, so it is absolutely possible to reach level 50. In fact, doing fights like Porta de Cumana will still give poetics while running with duty support, so a full set of item level 130 equipment is also accessible. The first roadblock will be Thornmarch Hard, as duty support is not offered here. This means we will have to go alone. This highlights the first key point where soloing stops being feasible. We have to employ unrestricted party to continue. Furthermore, at this point, we have access to, at best, item level 130 equipment if we farm Porta de Cumana for poetics, and it should not surprise you that it does not matter what job we bring. Either we don't have the defense to survive the damage, or we don't have the healing to sustain, so overleveling is going to be a requirement. In other words, it is at this point no longer possible to solo Final Fantasy XIV without actively going out of your way to try and force it by drastically overleveling. For the sake of demonstration, here I am defeating the encounter with a level 90 warrior wearing a mishmash of around item level 130 equipment, a significant portion of it being normal quality. Naturally, I'm also using some actions that I wouldn't have in a real scenario. However, as you can see, this is so easily defeated that it is safe to assume that this is a trivial to overcome roadblock, assuming you take the time to power grind all the way to level 90 with level 50 content. For some alternative paths, you could access some item level 255 gear by picking up Gunbreaker or Dancer at level 60, or item level 385 gear from Reaper or Sage, Gunbreaker and Sage seeming particularly great as options to avoid the grind all the way to level 90. For the sake of identifying real roadblocks, what matters is ultimately 3 key concerns. 1. While wearing appropriately accessible equipment, is a mandatory encounter capable of defeating a level 90 job on damage alone? 2. Again, while wearing appropriately accessible equipment, does a mandatory encounter contain a DPS check that is impossible to reach by a level 90 job? And 3. Does a mandatory encounter contain a mechanic that is unbeatable alone, even regardless of point 1 and 2? Now, it turns out that all of the A Realm Reborn post-game trials can be soloed by level 90 warrior wearing appropriate gear for the encounter, although Titan's Jail causes his fight to be extremely long, and Nabrialis in the Chrysalis can do a tremendous amount of damage even against a level 90. However, neither fight can kill our level 90 warrior, or contains a DPS check that cannot be met. In other words, it is possible to solo A Realm Reborn's post-game, assuming you can level all the way to 90. You might be thinking, couldn't you just craft your own higher than item level 130 equipment? But no, as you would need materials from zones you do not yet have access to make these. This then brings us to Heavensward. Once again, I have picked up somewhat appropriate item level equipment for the demonstration. As it turns out that the duty support gives up supporting you the instant a trial appears, the first test is Ravana, who turns out to be very manageable. The dangerous mechanic that might be threatening is dealing with the ads. Getting knocked off the platform might also matter, but this never came up in my attempt. It is worth pointing out that by Ravana, you would not actually be able to pick up Shire equipment at item level 270 yet. However, given the ease of which I dealt with the encounter, I do not believe this was a significant factor. But then we reached Bismarck, who has a DPS check on the short intermissions, otherwise the encounters extended significantly. These are a non-issue. The dragon killers are also simple, as you have plenty of time to activate both on your own. But, and you might already know where I'm going with this, the green and blue serpent ad phase. Giving it everything I have, I can bring one of them to 2/3 of its HP before they stick up close and get a massive damage reduction buff. There is nothing a solo player can do about this. Either you can kill one of them in time, or you can't. By rushing just one of the ads, I managed to get it to 30% before I discovered that this phase is actually a DPS check. If you don't make it within 2.5 minutes, Bismarck gets bored and all but wipes you right then and there. Originally, I gave up at this point, but then I went in again with Reaper instead. Here's the gear used for that. Remember that Reapers are handed a quite decent set of armor and weapon when unlocked. Furthermore, as all the Reaper quests occur in A Realm Reborn zones, we can absolutely unlock Enshroud too. With Reaper, I can push the first ad to 50% HP before they get close, and then manage to kill both of them just barely in the nick of time before the check ends. The rest of the fight poses no further difficulty, letting us press on to Thornmarch and Nidhogg, where we bring back the warrior due to a severe lack of DPS checks. Thornmarch is, unsurprisingly, a big pushover, just like he is when doing it in the trial roulettes. Nidhogg, on the other hand, includes the Pentastack Arkmorn, which deals over 50,000 damage in total. Luckily, Warrior's healing can still outpace this. As such, we can conclude that with a level 90 Warrior and Reaper, you could solo all of Heavensward's main quest. As we move into Stormblood, while this video is made while Stormblood has yet to offer duty support, it is coming with patch 6.4, so I will simply act like it is available for the content it is slated to be released for. And anyway, Siren Song C can absolutely be soloed. However, that victory is short-lived, as some of you may already realize, the very first trial of Stormblood, the first encounter not offering duty support, Susano, is not soloable. It doesn't even matter whether we bring appropriate gear or full item level 630 equipment, it cannot be done. For the sake of completeness, let us give it a shot nonetheless. Here's the equipment I used for the attempt. While every single mechanic he can throw at us is not enough to kill us, this is irrelevant because at around 70% HP, or perhaps around 3 minutes in, perhaps when he runs out of phase 1 mechanics even, he becomes untargetable, and enter into an unskippable intermission where one player has to block his sword from striking down, while everyone else beats it back. Now, you might see why this would be a problem, given that we have a, let's see, 1 player in total. Failing the mechanic leads to 6 9s in damage that ignores invulnerability and damage reduction, so there's nothing we can do about this. The only way we would even damage the sword is by using placeable AoEs like Dark Knight's Salted Earth or Ninja's Doton. However, it should come as no surprise that with appropriate gear, the damage from these abilities aren't even remotely close to enough on their own. Failing that, the only other option is to kill Susano before the intermission even occurs, which I can just say right now is also not an option in appropriate gear. Which means that our dreams of soloing Final Fantasy XIV without help from anyone stops here. Now, you might be thinking, but wait Katsu, you aren't even using a proper Skaven weapon. Yes, that is correct. However, by Susano, we still wouldn't have access to Skaven gear yet at all. And even if we went and crafted our own stuff, the only weapons that would actually surpass the weapon I brought that we could feasibly craft in Stormblood requires a material bought for Poetics in Ralga's Reach, where the vendor isn't present yet, and so we do not have access to this yet. Remember, the blue pouch vendor in Kugane doesn't appear before you have unlocked access to this equipment in the first place. And so, we have found a point where duty support is unavailable, and we cannot beat it alone either. With that said, if a player genuinely just wanted to solo Final Fantasy XIV's main quest, they might just choose to use items bought from the Marketboard anyway. You don't have to interact with anyone else to use it, so this could reasonably be argued to be available. As such, to see how far you could get solo, let's lift the restriction that the Marketboard is off limits. This means that we now could use a full set of item level 610 equipment, and given enough time and money, we could even overmeld all of it ourselves to absolutely maximize our damage. For the sake of demonstration, I will simply use whatever gear my jobs have lying around, which is significantly stronger. However, this hardly matters. So, going back into the Susano fight, we now even more easily deal with all the mechanics, but despair sets in as we realize that Susano simply engages the intermission sooner if we push his HP too hard. At around 35 to 40%, he skips directly to the good bit, and we are doomed. We can engage the sword and we die. We can not engage the sword and we die. The only options are to either kill the sword while tanking it, or to kill Susano so fast that the intermission doesn't happen in the first place. Let's approach the first one. With my equipment, against Susano, Salted Earth does somewhere in the range of 2000 damage per tick, but from the time I place down Salted Earth to the sword being attackable, around 1 or 2 ticks will already have passed, so a grand total of around 6000 damage. Ninja Stoton does around twice that damage per tick, and fits an extra total tick, leading to around 16,000 damage. Just to sanity check, I brought my friend Zip in so that I could count the HP of the sword. It has around 40,000 HP at the very least. In other words, this strategy will not work either. Maybe in the next expansion. This leaves us with the burst strategy. Kill Susano before the intermission begins. To do this, we would need to have Susano engage a time-consuming mechanic and then rush him down to 0 HP before it finishes. Unfortunately, it turns out that Susano is capable of cancelling whatever he's doing to engage the intermission if his HP drops to 35%. You can see in this attempt that Susano cancels out of the Thundercloud mechanic, and here in the Samurai try, he cancels out of a stack marker, so this will not work either. Even if he didn't cancel out of the mechanics, most of them take not much more than 10 seconds to resolve. And not even a job like Samurai can rush him down fast enough to take him from 35% to 0 in 10 seconds, at least not yet. This means that when pulling out all of the stops, at best you can solo Final Fantasy XIV up to level 63 in the main quest, where Susano will force you to find at least one friend, or give up. Now with that said, you may be wondering what the third key point was about: no duty support and no unrestricted party. Well, all content in the current expansion disallows unrestricted parties entirely. This means that any content that does not offer duty support would, assuming we could even reach it, be inaccessible. And even if we somehow could get a foot in the door, we would be synced, and these fights absolutely cannot be done solo synced. The very first trial of Endwalker, which is a big spoiler, so I will not get any more specific than that, would put an end to the solo run. You cannot use duty support, unrestricted parties disabled, and even if you brought 7 friends along to quit the dungeon at the very start to help you inside, I highly doubt even a warrior could live through the quadruple stack markers alone. In other words, you will never be able to complete the current expansion solo, because the game will simply not allow it. So to summarize, can you solo Final Fantasy XIV? No, absolutely not. But you can solo a Realm Reborn's leveling story legitimately with duty support. And you can solo a Realm Reborn's postgame story and Heavenswards leveling and postgame if you are willing to severely overlevel the content, which, without access to any duty roulettes, will take an eternity. However, you cannot solo any more beyond this, as the first trial of Stormblood requires 2 players until you can somehow kill Susano fast enough to skip his intermission. Even if you allowed access to Marketboard, you would still not be able to continue beyond Susano. Until then, we won't even need to know whether Sri Lakshmi can be soloed, although she probably can be, or even Tsukuyomi, who has been proven to be soloable by a Blue Mage synced at least. After all, these fights wouldn't even be accessible in a solo run of the game in the first place. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, even if Susano was beatable, 2 of the 4 mandatory trials in Shadowbringers depend on there being multiple players. One by disabling you until an extra player helps you, the other because it requires a tank limit break 3. Although, if you are a tank, it might just be possible to survive without.